and welcome back to my channel. Today I am doing the DeaD-Famous read-along tag. The DeaD-Famous read-along, for those of you who don't know or haven't been paying attention to any of my content recently, I've been doing the DeaD-Famous read-along since February of this year, where we read one Skulduggery book a month in the hopes that we will time it perfectly so that when the grand finale of Skulduggery comes out in like March, April time, we will be ready and we will be, you know, with the Skulduggery story fresh in our minds. Skulduggery is a middle grade series about a skeleton detective and his sarcastic, sassy sidekick Valkyrie, who is technically the main character, but she is definitely his sidekick and not the other way around. I really love their dynamic. If you haven't read this series, it's so fun. Like, it's such a fun series. But I do appreciate that a 14 book series can be quite intimidating, even if it's middle grades, even if it's YA, but it is absolutely worth the read. So to champion the fact that we are now officially over halfway, and have been for quite some time actually, about 2 months, I've been meaning to do this for 2 months, I thought I would celebrate that with an original tag. So this is a tag all about the characters in the DeaD-Famous series, so there shouldn't be any spoilers with the tag, so if you haven't got around to reading it yet, don't worry, you can still take part if you still want to do the DeaD-Famous tag. I would still love to see your responses, so fear not on that regard. After seeing my responses to each of the prompts, you think I should have chosen a better book, please leave that as a comment down below. I'd love to see this as like a little cheeky way to get some more recommendations of books similar to Skulduggery, because I've really enjoyed it. And I was nervous going into a read along, one because I've never hosted one before, and two because it's such a long series and doesn't she just love to bite off more than she can chew. Yes, let's move on to the prompts then. The first one is obviously Valkyrie Cain. Valkyrie Cain is one of the main characters. She's the sidekick that I referenced earlier. She's not a sidekick, I just like calling her that. Also, I'm wearing a coat because the heating is not on during the day and I'm very cold when recording this, so I'm wearing my coat. Anyway, I just thought I'd explain that going in. So Valkyrie Cain, she is a bit of an anti-heroine. She is a hero, she does heroic things, but she also can make some selfish choices, and there is some stuff further down the line which kind of makes her not a hero. Definitely has like traditional heroic vibes, but I really wanted this to be an excuse to talk about anti-heroines. We see anti-heroes mentioned a lot in literature, but I think sometimes we can forget that female characters or female presenting characters can be anti-heroes slash heroines as well. So I want to talk about anti-heroines. So my first one is going to be The Murder of Graham Catton. This is about a woman called Hannah Catton whose husband was murdered 10 years ago. She doesn't really remember if she did it or if someone else did it or if he killed himself. She doesn't want to remember. She is working as a psychiatrist, working with women who have eating disorders, so there is a lot of trigger warnings for this book as well. But she's not a nice person, right? Like, she's going through the trauma of having this whole thing brought back, and that is really hard for her. But she's not a good person. You're rooting for her the whole time, but you're also like, do you trust that she actually didn't kill her husband? Because she doesn't even know. Like, so how are we supposed to know? And I really like that. It really added to the mystery of it. It was a really clever plot, and I think it just works really well for this prompt. So that is my first one. Number two is Skulduggery, which is your favourite mystery or thriller. And the reason I wanted it to be mystery or thriller and not just one or the two is because some books are fantasies, but they have a great mystery themed plot, etc. So feel free to swap it out. If you're not a massive fan of thrillers, that's absolutely fine. I, again, probably would have picked The Murder of Graham Catton for this, but because that was already in my list, I went with My Sister the Serial Killer, which is my second favourite thriller of all time. This is so clever. It's a short, punchy read. It's really fun, and it just had me on the edge of my seat the entire time. The premise of this is that there are two sisters. One of them is a nurse, and one of them, their boyfriends just keep mysteriously dying, and she knows full well that her sister is a serial killer, and she's fine with that. She helps her sister like bury the bodies, etc. However, when the sister turns her attention to the man that the nurse has been desperately in love with for quite some time, that's when things start to get tense, and it's so cleverly done. And I also really enjoy the neon green as well, so would definitely recommend that. And that's my Skulduggery as the detective, my mystery prompt. Next is China Sorrows. China Sorrows is such an interesting character because she is such a perfect villainess, but she also is incredibly intelligent, she's incredibly intimidating, and she's incredibly beautiful. And the whole point is that there is this magic wrapped around her. She is this enchantress that people just fall in love with the moment they meet her. So I wanted, for this prompt, the China Sorrows prompt, you need a beautiful book that is totally intimidating. So I have gone for my copy of War and Peace, which I bought. It's obviously I think it's the Barnes & Noble. Is it Barnes & Noble? Yeah, it is. It's the Barnes & Noble. I knew it was either Barnes & Noble or like there was like a Wordsworth version that was going around, and I can never remember which ones I've spent more, like, no, and there's like a Collins one, I can't remember, but anyway, so there's a couple of like producers that specifically do the leather bound ones, and it's so beautiful, but it's so big, and the story is so dense, and like the writing is so small, and I will eventually get to this classic, but like, while Sarah J Maas is still writing books, why would I want to? Do you know what I'm saying? I'm not saying they're the same, I'm just saying there's things I'd rather read than War and Peace, but it's so pretty. It's so pretty, and this was actually a TK Maxx purchase as well, so it was only like £7. And it's just, oh god, it's heavy. It's hurting my arms to hold it up, but it's so pretty. So it's beautiful and intimidating, which is what the prompt called for. So next is Tanith Lo, which is a book with great fight scenes. Tanith Lo is essentially like a Cockney ninja, which will only make sense if you've read the books, but I think you'll appreciate that description if you have read the books. So yes, our resident Cockney ninja is Tanith Lo, and that is why that's why it's great fight scenes, because she's an amazing fighter. So I have gone with Kings of the Wild. This is every D&D player's dream of what a narrative should be. It goes from, like, it's a whole bunch of older men. They were all heroes in their time, but they've all retired, and then they have to kind of get the band back together to save some people. It's a lot of drama, but it's a lot of fight scenes, and it's different fight scenes. Some they win, some they lose, and it's just really, really interesting. But there are, like, it's just the diverse dynamic of each fight scene is really fun. I really appreciated that. It's got LGBTQ rep as well, and I really enjoyed it. It was a really fun read, and I think some fantasies can be quite heavy. This is not a dense fantasy at all. It's just great. It's just great, and it's got great fight scenes. So if you haven't read this yet, I would absolutely recommend it. And if you just in general like enjoy the sass and sarcasm of Skulduggery, this is like an adult version of that same sort of sass, so I appreciate that. Like, different settings but very similar writing styles, so I appreciated that. That is going on my list. Next is Ghastly Bespoke. Ghastly is a boxer and tailor, so the next prompt is going to be a book that is really well written, and I have gone for the Mirror season, and for a very specific reason. I am triggered by exactly one thing in books, and that is any form of sexual assault, but specifically rape. It is a trigger for me for reasons that I've gone into in the past. I've never been sexually assaulted, but as a teacher it was something that I would have to deal with students and safeguarding and things like that, and I found it very, very difficult to read about. And this is a book specifically about sexual assault, so you'd think this would just be one massive trigger for me that I would absolutely hate it. But Anna Marie McLemore does such a beautiful job of writing about the aftermath of the sexual assault and dealing with that process, and in the acknowledgements she writes that actually this is something that she's had to deal with, that she was writing this during the process of her own trial, taking someone to court for sexually assaulting her, and it's so authentic, and it's so beautiful, and it's Latinx, and it's got all that kind of like, oh, it's just beautiful. It's so well written, and it's so cleverly crafted that I wasn't triggered by it. It wasn't something that I went in and was like, oh, this is jarring or anything like that. It really took the time to care about its subject matter, and I really appreciated that, which is why I have picked this one for well written. It's so beautifully written, and when I can get my hands on more McLemore, I absolutely will, because what a stunning writer. Excellent work. Okay, next is Vaurien Scapegrace. Vaurien Scapegrace I think comes up in either book 2 or 3 and then becomes a running antagonist throughout the narrative, and he's just an idiot. He's just an idiot. He's just not very good at being a villain or a good guy, which I find very amusing. And we do get a few chapters from his perspective, so he absolutely deserved a prompt for himself. So there was never going to be like a positive prompt. So the prompt for Vaurien Scapegrace is a book that missed the mark, a book that was trying to do something and didn't manage it. And for me, I've gone for The Wolf by Hannah Witton. This is meant to be a sexy Red Riding Hood retelling with an angsty wolfman and dark gothic vibes. And it's a very tame YA with some smooching, and I think there was a sex scene, but it was so tame that I don't know what I was expecting. I think I was expecting this to feel more like an adult novel than a YA, and it came out so YA and so beige. And there are gothic tropes in it, right? Like, and it is dark. And maybe it's just that I'm jaded as fuck, but I don't think bleeding on a lot of shit all the time is that dark. Because once you've described bleeding to me a couple of times, alright, you need to up the ante, and the ante was never upped. So it was just a case of, it was just a bit anticlimactic, and it really missed the mark for me. And I was really disappointed because this was another one that I pre-ordered because I was so excited, and it was so hyped to be like a dark gothic read, but it was kind of like, what was that one that was like set in Russia that was just a bit shit? I can't remember. It was like Wicked Saints or something like that. That one. It was just, that was a bit shit. This isn't as bad as that. Like, it's not badly written. It just wasn't what I was promised. I was promised dark, sexy, gothic vibes, and what I got was a Beauty and the Beast retelling. It feels like a Beauty and the Beast retelling. And it does set up a great villain origin story for another character. So I'm tempted to read book 2, but we will see, because I'm not convinced. So yeah, this is one, it's not a bad book, it just missed the mark for me. Next is Fletcher Renn. Fletcher Renn is Valkyrie's... Fletcher Renn is... Let's start that whole thing again. Fletcher Renn is a teleporter who is about the same age as Valkyrie, and they go on like adventures and stuff together. He is serially judged by Skulduggery Pleasant and everyone else, but he's such a boy. Like, he's such a boy, and it's really funny, and he gets a really fun character arc, and I really like him. Like, he's a really cool guy with stupid hair, which again you'll get if you've read the books, and if you don't, like, that's fine. But because he's a teleporter, he can obviously jump to wherever he wants at any given time. He doesn't have to think about it, he just has to have been there before. So he often flits between the UK and Australia just because he likes the sunshine. The prompt for Fletcher Renn is a book with lots of settings, and I've gone with the Library of the Unwritten. This is about a pansexual librarian who has to maintain books that have not been written in the unwritten library. And essentially, if you ever had a book idea but you've never written it, or you've never finished it or anything like that, you've just had this idea at 3 o'clock in the morning, that book then becomes a book in the library, and it basically is protected in this library. But sometimes those characters want to be written, they want something to happen, so they will manifest themselves and go out into the real world. And it's about this librarian basically wrangling them back into the hellish library. But then more shenanigans happen. There's demons, there's angels, there's Valhalla. They go to an Egyptian version of heaven. They go to like so many interesting places, but there's just loads of different settings, and I did enjoy that. I do have a problem sometimes with books that will just jump from setting to setting to setting, and it tends to be in YA fantasies where they're going on a journey, and rather than actually showing the process of the journey and what they're learning and experience on the way, it will just go, first they were on this setting, then there's this one, and then there was this one, and like there's loads of those. So I wanted to choose one where that's a positive thing, like the fact that they're almost time jumping and jumping through parallel universes and learning things about themselves as they go. Like, that's all great. I really liked that, and it's a really fun book. And I've actually got the second one on my Gothtober TBR, so I'm really excited to get to the second one because it's a really fun read. It is a trilogy, so the third one I think is coming out in Feb of next year. So yeah, excited for that. It was a good time. Okay, and then the final official prompt is the Davina Marr prompt. Now, I'm not going to give any spoilers as to who Davina Marr is or why that's important. She was kind of picked out as a random antagonist, but just because I thought this would work really well with a prompt. So she does something really problematic, and it is quite topical. So I thought it'd be interesting to see what you guys had as a response to this prompt. So for the Davina Marr prompt, you have to pick a book which has a controversial topic or discusses something political. And I'm going with Superior by Angelina Saini. Again, I bring this book up quite a lot just because I just think it's a phenomenal read. So essentially, Angela Saini is a journalist, and I think she's a sociologist as well, but she has written several books on feminism, race, etc. And this is essentially looking at how the scholars of race science have defined racism and encouraged racism throughout millennia, looking way back into history and how colonisation and empiricalism, all those other things. Build a society that is inherently racist, and what we can, not necessarily what we can do about it, but how we can recognise that and why it has happened, which I thought was really, really interesting. I was kind of worried that going into it, because it's looking at race science, as a white reader, that I would feel that the white privilege and white guilt was going to be like a main theme of that. It really isn't, and that's not to say that it shouldn't be, but it's not something, like, don't be put off if you're like, I don't want to feel guilty for being white. That's not what people are asking of you, and that's not what this book is asking of you, so it's just for your consideration. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really interesting read. It is incredibly personal. It feels like a bunch of essays, but it feels far more informal than that. If you enjoyed Pandora's Jar as a style of writing, it's very, very similar to that, but I really, really enjoyed it, so I would absolutely recommend it. And it was a non-fiction. I think it's my only non-fiction in this list, but it was worth adding. There you go. And then obviously the final prompt is to tag 3 other people. So I'm going to tag people that I know have read this book. At least the first one. So I will be tagging Lizzie from Lizzie as Elf. I will be tagging Dani from Bookish Dani. And obviously my co-host I've already sent this to, so they can have a go at this. But Abi in particular, I would love to see you do this tag. So yes, other than that, let me know which of these books you've read. If they're available via Waypoint, the links will be down below. And other than that, have a nice day.